In the book of Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, the Apostle Paul would say, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, I beg you, I'm pleading with you. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Rational. I'm going to impress you right now. I know 3 Greek words. I'm going to use one of them. Logikos. That word reasonable is logikos. Now the reason why I do that, if you pronounced it the way it looks to me, it would look like logikos. Does that sound like an English word? Logical. Christianity is logical. Living for God is logical. Living a sacrificial life where you're pure and holy and focused on spiritual things is logical. I beg you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your rational service. And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We need to be a people who are transformed. So many of these lessons are just melding together. My compliments to whoever planned all this is perfect. Because you see, if we step out of the boat of carnality, we're going to go against the social norms. And we're going to do things that the world says that's abnormal. In Romans, the 8th chapter, to really emphasize the importance of this topic, Romans chapter 8, beginning at verse number 5, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. Now get this, for to be carnally minded is death. Now you get that right there. This tells us this is important stuff. Now my presentation may be sorry this afternoon, but this is important stuff. We better pay attention. We better get this down, because to be carnally minded is death. We'll define that a little bit more in just a moment. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God. That ought to tell you this is important. I do not want to be in a fight, and I especially don't want to be in a fight with God. For it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. What does it mean to be carnally minded? Our brother Bob Winton had this definition. I thought it was pretty good. I think it's in your books. To be carnally minded is to allow the appetites and passions of the flesh to govern and control our dispositions and life. It is that inclination to serve the desires of the flesh. Just now at lunch, they had a table of desserts. I like dessert. They have banana pudding and blackberry cobbler. I like blackberry cobbler. I want blackberry cobbler. I want blackberry cobbler right now. And that's all I'm going to be thinking about is blackberry cobbler. Well, you know we're not here to talk about blackberry cobbler. No. You see, you got to be watching out for that too. But we're talking about the appetites of the flesh. I want that $90,000 car. Now I'm going to have to be delinquent on other bills. I'm going to have to steal from the Lord to do it. I'm going to tell my wife, you will work outside the home. Grandma will watch the children. But I want that $90,000 car. I want this house. Sometimes it's, I want that woman. I want this prestige. I want it, man. I want it. That is carnality. Colossians chapter 3, verse number 1, gives us the flip side, tells us who we should be. Colossians 3, verse 1, if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. We're different people, man. We're different. We're not conformed to the thinking of this world. The world has a mold, and the world wants to say, you're a man, and this is what a man is, and God says they don't even have a clue what it means to be a man. We want to be God's man, a real man, courageous leaders who do not set our minds on things on the earth, but those things which are above. I'm blessed. I get to talk to brethren literally all over the country. And matter of fact, on the way down here, the phone rang several times talking to brethren. From Missouri to Texas, from Florida to beyond. Everybody's talking about what Wes was talking about a little bit ago. None of us, 3 years ago, we would not have said, you know, masks are going to divide the church. We said, you're crazy. You're crazy. If somebody would have said a little germ that we can't even see is going to divide the church. Well, I do know this. Listen to me closely, because I don't want to be misunderstood, and I'll try to say it clearly. My heart breaks for every individual who will not return to the worship of the Lord's church. I cannot take credit for what I'm about to say. I believe it was Brother Marshall Keeple said that when a bad apple falls off the tree, it does not affect the rest of the apples. We've got some bad apples that have fallen off. And I'm not saying that gleefully. But we need to be strong. There are people out there who need to hear the gospel. And if we think like the rest of the world, we're going, our numbers are down. Our numbers are down. What are we doing wrong? We got to go get them. Listen. We lovingly, patiently request that they come back. But there are people out there who deserve to hear the gospel once before they hear it over and over and over again. The problem facing our brotherhood has never, in any age, the problem in our brotherhood has never been an attendance problem. The problem is commitment to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And when that happens, it's carnality. I'd rather stay home. I don't want to go. And it really comes down, carnality, at the heart of carnality, is a heart problem. Look over at Matthew chapter 15. I've got a truck here. I'm about to abuse that 5 minutes that he said. So let me pick up the pace a little bit. In Matthew chapter 15, the religious elites are upset with the disciples, with Jesus, because his disciples are eating with unwashed hands. This is not a matter of hygiene, but a ceremonial washing that they have imposed. That is a matter of the traditions of men. And Jesus points out to them, because of your traditions, you violate the law of God. You make a mockery out of it all. And then, listen to what Jesus says to them. I'm trying to emphasize the problem of the heart. This is where carnality begins. Verse number 7, hypocrites. Now these are religious folks. In the first century, if you wanted to know, now what does a really pious religious person look like? Well, look at that Pharisee. Hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Now, isn't that rather amazing? It shows it wasn't that they misinterpreted Scripture, understand me. But it wasn't because, they just made a technical error in their hermeneutic. The number one rule for good hermeneutics is a good heart. If you don't have a heart that wants to serve God, you'll never interpret the Bible right. Listen to what he says beginning at verse 18. Well, no. Let's back up to verse 12. This is getting on another lesson that was mentioned earlier, but I want you to notice this, verse number 12. Then his disciples said to him, "Do you not know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying?" I appreciate what so much, I believe Wes said the last lesson. We don't set out to make people upset. Matter of fact, that's one of the points, Lord willing, I'll make here in just a moment. But there's going to be people that get upset. And I honestly, brethren, I'm about at the point where I'm ready to chirp when I hear brethren say, what did we do wrong? What did we do wrong? How come what did we do wrong? We may have not done our best always, I know that. But in reality, we give someone the gospel and we try our very best, and in reality, when I give my very best, it's a very faint reflection of Jesus. When I try my best, and if my personality is the only thing that keeps someone coming, there's a problem. They've got to love the Lord. And if they get offended, I'm sorry. I'm not joyful about that. Now notice what Jesus says beginning at verse number 18. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man, for out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. What's the problem with this mindset of feeding our flesh? This carnal mindset, what's the problem? It's a heart problem. Christianity is a heart religion. And so, as we think about this, let me mention a few things that I think are absolutely essential. Dependence on conventional wisdom is carnality. Well, you know, Highlands Fellowship, now I don't know what they call it down here, but there's everything. Highlands Fellowship, they have 1,200 people coming on Sunday morning. They must be doing something right. What is that? Are we just in the marketing business? We're salesmen for Jesus. We're just instead of vacuum cleaners, we're selling Jesus. Isn't it amazing when you look at Luke chapter 14, beginning at verse number 26? Now I'm telling you, this is, if we would have the audacity to just go ahead and tell people what Jesus said. Matter of fact, I had a Bible study with a young couple a while back, and you know, I'm not a brute. I don't want you to think I'm a brute. But I knew this young couple, they wanted some cool religion, and they wanted me to study with them. And I said, well, let me explain to you what we're going to be talking about. Jesus, not me. Jesus says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, yes, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Does that fit conventional wisdom? That is not the way to grow a church. But that's the way we attract disciples of Jesus. Carnality, don't offend them. Well, we know it's said not to offend them. The wise man would say, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. This world's gotten wacky, hasn't it? Wes was talking about this a little while ago. Why is Tri-City School of Preaching and Christian Development in business? Why is Florida School of Preaching in business? Someone said, well, to train preachers. Wrong. That's not why we're there. We're not there. That's not the reason why we are there. We're not. That's the what we do. We're there because probably right now, right this very moment, somewhere in this country, an 8-year-old's being told, you know, nature probably made a mistake with your gender. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 8 says, you know what? Bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having the promise, now listen closely, you know the verse, having the promise of what? The life that now is, and that which is to come. The best way to live right now is as a Christian. Florida School of Preaching, Tri-City School of Preaching, every faithful school of preaching, every faithful work, we're in the business of challenging the status quo of this dark world, changing lives now and for eternity. Conventional wisdom said, no, that's not the way to do it. That's carnality. Cultivating lust is carnality. Matthew chapter 5, verse number 28, but I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This is a tough subject for a number of reasons, and part of it is defining terms. It's a little tough to define terms. And I'm not going to camp out here today, but I will mention to you a few things about it because it is one thing that every man in this room deals with. When I was about 19 years old, I went to a gospel meeting. Brother Charles Hodge was speaking, and he was explaining lust. And Brother Hodge said, you know, there's nothing wrong with noticing the beauty of a flower. But if that flower begins to make you nervous, you better get away. Now, there was a problem with that definition because at 19 years old, every flower made me nervous, okay? I'm not 19 anymore, but I still have to be on guard. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart for you, Gabe, and other young men here in this room. What I'm about to say breaks my heart. When I was growing up, men still were carnally minded, but for the most part, there were some exceptions, but they were rare. For the most part, the women, the girls, were the moral gatekeepers. And when a man started to cross the line and say, you're not going to do that. I don't believe that's the case today. And it breaks my heart. And I wish I could say, well, guys, you don't have any, it's not your fault. You have to take extra strides to keep yourself morally pure. Husbands, I'm going to challenge you to do something. And I'm not going to challenge you to do something I haven't done. You go home, if this should already be the case, but if it's not, you make sure your wife has every password to every device you have and every account you have, and you tell her, honey, you get on my devices any time you want to. Incidentally, it needs to be the other way as well. Talking about a different world, it's weird, the things that I've seen in the last several years, and TJ knows about the particular case I'm thinking of, a case where a woman ended up committing adultery, and it started with texting a guy. And one day her husband's phone wasn't working. He said, I need to borrow your phone. And she grabbed that phone. You don't need my phone. Yeah, uh-oh's right. And all our devices, honey, you look at anything I got. And you need to have brothers you can confide in. And you need to be honest about it. And there's just some stuff I'm just too young to see. I can't handle it. We've got to be on our guard about that. Incidentally, let me mention one other thing. Sometimes it's really easy for us to get into some joking. I believe in Ephesians chapter 5, I believe this is the idea of coarse jesting. I don't believe it means we can't kid around with each other. I don't believe that. But in context, I think it's about talking about sexual content. I'm not a fan of the NIV, but I believe they nailed Ephesians 5, verse 3. There should not even be a hint, you get this? There should not even be a hint of sexual immorality among you. I've heard brothers come up and they put their arm around another brother's wife and say, I'm going to take her home, you take my wife home. And I've told them, that's not a way to joke, man. That is not a way to joke. Besides being inappropriate, you don't know what road you're going down. And when you go down a dead-end road, sometimes it's really hard to turn around. Unfaithfulness is carnality, and it begins in the heart. No, it's always the heart. It's always the heart. Unfaithfulness. Proverbs 14, verse 14, the backslider in heart will be filled with his own ways. The backslider in heart. I'm very impressed when I look at the book of Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 8, he's carried to Jerusalem in a vision. And they are so filled with idolatry that to even get into the temple, he has to walk around an idol. And he sees hidden compartments where people are doing ungodly, abominable things. And then he sees 25 men facing the sun, their backs to the temple. I believe I can make a case that's the 24 course of the priest, and the one would be the high priest. And the men of God have turned their backs on God. Jerusalem's in a bad way. You go over to Ezekiel chapter 14, now they're in captivity. The scene is back in captivity. The scene is back in captivity, and some elders, these are good-looking guys. They come to see Ezekiel. And God, so to speak, interrupts and says to Ezekiel, Ezekiel, should I allow myself to be inquired of these men who set up idols in their heart? You see, Jerusalem had the actual idols. They're in captivity. They don't have any idols outwardly. They've got idols, but they're in their heart. We've got to watch those idols in our heart, brethren. And unfaithfulness begins in the heart. We've got a lot of members that have stopped attending. But we always struggle with members who are in the pew, but they're not there. A brother mentioned something to me at lunch, made me think about this. We have a preacher shortage. Really, brethren, we have a preacher shortage. Many men have just quit preaching. Unfortunately, many of them are still in the pulpit. And it's a heart problem. It's a heart problem, and it's unfaithfulness. It's carnality. An appetite for conflict is carnality. Again, the wise man would say, he who is proud of heart stirs up strife. Sometimes we can't help the fight. There's going to be a fight. I believe it was Franklin Camp, but I don't know for sure, but I believe it was Franklin Camp said, I hope I'm never afraid to fight, but I hope I never fall in love with fighting. And we've got to be men who are willing to take a stand. A loose tongue is carnality. James chapter 1 verse number 26 says, if anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Over in Ephesians chapter 4, and I'm about to close out here, over in Ephesians chapter 4 is a great chapter on communication. And I heard a sermon on Ephesians 4 and communication years ago, and it was a revolution for me in terms of my mindset toward preaching. It really was. And I'm still trying to learn to preach, but that was an important ingredient there for me. And as we look at the text, he talks about how we communicate with one another. But I want you to look at Ephesians 4, verse 29. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Now, I don't know if I heard someone else say this. I might have heard it that night in the sermon, or whether or not I put this together. I don't know where, but it's right there in the verse. It's right there in the verse. Have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, I got something I just got to say"? Usually when someone says that, they have nothing to say. You know what I'm saying? You with me? I used to think I needed to preach because I had something to say. I have something that people need to hear. Carnality says, "I've got something to say," and you're going to listen to it. Being spiritually minded says, "I've got something they need to hear." And being spiritually minded says, "I'm going to back up and I'm going to listen so I know what they need to hear." I know this, brethren. I know that we're living in a very difficult time, but I'm deeply, deeply, deeply encouraged when I see a room full of men who want to be effective disciples for Jesus Christ. And the challenge for you and the challenge for me is, let's not set our mind on things here on the earth, but those things which are above. God bless you.